Hi, everyone. Doing a sound check here. Could an online guest please give me a thumbs up if the audio is good? Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. I will call us to order. This is the July 9th, 2024 City of Portland Planning Commission meeting. I'm the chair, Mary Rain O'Mara, and we are all in person here today as commissioners. So we were just all remarking on how great that is. So I'm joined by all of the commissioners in person, Commissioner Ling, Vice Chair Thompson, Commissioner Routh stepped away maybe for a moment, but I know she's here. Vice Chair Pouncil, Commissioner Alexander, Commissioner Spivak, and Commissioner Patel. So do we have any items of interest as we get started today from commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Spivak.
Thank you. In my volunteer hat, I'm with an organization called Electrify PDX, a program of Families for Climate. And I'd like to thank BPS for sponsoring an event we're doing in the September 15th, Electrify Portland at the Red. It's going to be an exciting event. And if you don't want to wait that long to figure out how to electrify your home, join us for the electric ride as part of Pedalpalooza on July 20th, 10 a.m. And many other good rides there too. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other items of interest from commissioners? Okay. Patricia, is there a director's report today?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Patricia Diefendorfer, for the record, BPS Chief Planner. I think no items on the director's report today. Just move on to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Next item is our consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve? A motion to approve. Commissioner Routh, is there a second? Vice Chair Thompson.
I'll second.
Vice Chair Thompson, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, we can move on. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, consent agenda is approved. And now we will move on to the main item of our agenda today, which is a continuation of the Montgomery Park Area Plan. I know we're going to kick off with a continued presentation by staff. And so while staff is getting ready, are there any disclosures from commissioners as relates to this item? Commissioner Ling.
I'm still on the board of Portland Streetcar Inc.
Thank you, Commissioner Ling. Any other disclosures from commissioners? Okay. I will hand it over to staff for the presentation.
Barry Manning, BPS staff. Bear with me just a minute while I get zoomed in and we will start.
And while we're working on tech, just a quick run through of the planned process here today. So staff will give a brief presentation, then we will have some closing remarks by Patricia and Interim Director Eric Engstrom. Then we will open it up to discussion and questions before we go through the amendments. And after we have discussion, we'll invite staff back up and staff will continue with the amendments. Does that sound right, Patricia, in terms of order?
Yes, that's fine.
I think,
Share the screen.
was disabled. How are we doing now? Are we all set? Great, thanks for your patience. Barry Manning, BPS staff, here to talk again about the Montgomery Park Area Plan proposed draft, another Planning Commission work session. And we have, as folks just talked about, some slides to share with you, talking a little bit about the preliminary racial equity analysis, which was brought up last time. We have some new demographic information we'll be sharing with you. We'll have some staff closing remarks, and then there'll be some time for commission discussion and deliberation, and then launching into potential amendments and any commission recommendations. So that's the agenda for tonight. Or for today, this afternoon. And just a reminder, overall, where we're at in the work session scheduled topics, we're at the 7-9 work session. We've had 2 work sessions following a public hearing on May 21st. So launching in, the first slide we wanted to talk about was a little bit about the preliminary racial equity analysis, which was a topic that the commissioners brought up at the last meeting and asked some questions about. And we just wanted to share this slide with you and remind folks that equity analysis was an important foundational background document that helped set the direction for future community engagement and approaches to advancing equity in the Montgomery Park to Hollywood planning process and the resulting proposed Montgomery Park area plan that you're considering now. On July 8th, which was just yesterday, staff provided a memo to the Planning Commission that outlined how the plan considered and incorporated guidance and recommendations from the report in the Montgomery Park to Hollywood planning process and how they're realized in the Montgomery Park area plan. As that memo noted, the preliminary equity analysis identified and prioritized a set of desired equitable outcomes based on a review of comprehensive plan policies. These and other recommendations in the document were considered during the planning and engagement process. The specific approaches taken in both the MP2H process and outcomes in MPAP were further informed by subsequent outreach and analysis. And what I'm showing you here is just a quick slide summarizing a snapshot of some of the key themes in the equity analysis and how the plan responds to them. So in terms of outreach and engagement, as we noted in the memo that we sent to you, we worked with 4 community-based organizations initially in early 2020 and 2021 to help gather information and find and understand perspectives of different communities. We subsequently worked with the York Street Work Group, which was another group that was funded through the project to provide information and feedback. Another key topic and theme from that equity analysis was the notion of leveraging land value changes and other investments to achieve equity benefits. And as we've stated before and stated in the memo, the public benefits agreement and the zoning code provisions capture value for the capture value of land use changes for public benefits that help promote equity. There's a focus, whoops, I'm sorry. Wrong button. The report had to focus on equity strategies for jobs and businesses, and as we've noted in the memo and you see in the plan, the land use approach preserves significant amounts of industrial area that were first initially considered for change and then subsequently tapered back, and also considers job opportunities while focusing areas of change to achieve other goals such as affordable housing and other benefits in the area, primarily west of Highway 30. The plan includes the benefits agreement, which has provisions for 800 middle-wage jobs, and the zoning includes required non-residential use and affordable commercial space within it. And then finally, a focus on another theme in the report, a focus on enhanced equitable housing strategies. And again, the plan responds with provisions for either upfront affordable housing, the 200 units early on, or deeper affordability or a greater number of units, 15% of the units at 60% MFI for some of the larger properties that would be subject to the benefits agreement in subdistricts B, C, and D, and then higher percentage, 12% for larger scale projects in subdistricts E and F. So that's just a quick recap. We have sent you a memo yesterday, and if you have questions about that, we'd be happy to answer them later on. With that, turn it over to Ryan.
I wanted to speak to questions that were raised about the Bureau's commitment to continuing engagement with York Working Group and other groups that have worked with us on Montgomery Park. The Bureau has a pretty long history of working with local community groups on a variety of efforts. Each group and each relationship is different and requires a different approach. So there's not really a direct parallel to anything that we have with Montgomery Park. But the examples that are listed here give you a flavor and sense of the type of work that we do and can continue to do. And the examples include both organizations that are engaged in planning-related work and those that are not. BPS has an equity and engagement group that works with a multitude of organizations and is constantly thinking of ways to support those organizations. This allows us to make connections and support organizations beyond the planning process. So, one example is SWEC, where we have ongoing work and engagement both during and after the West Portland Town Center plan. We have done letters of support for Afro Village PDX and are also working with Apano Communities United Fund on some site-specific housing proposals, and then other parts of the Bureau work with organizations like Free Geek and Trash for Peace, and those take the form of funding and support and grants, and even to some degree we hire them as consultants and we work with them on different parts of different things. I also believe that Commissioner Spivak mentioned another organization that we are engaged with, to provide just more community support. So these are the types of things that we would, types of things we do, and we envision continuing to engage with the groups that we've worked with in Montgomery Park in a variety of forms. We don't want to say what that will look like because we don't know what that will look like, but it will. It's something we do as part of our work program. Let's go next. I also wanted to take some time to put this proposal in context of the area and the city overall. The census tracts that include the study area have rapidly changed over the past, or in the past 12 years. We used 2010 to 2022 data. Overall, during that time period, the population grew by 19%. This is compared to 8% over the same period for the city of Portland overall. So it is a substantial area of growth. There was also a substantial rise in the number of high-income households in this area, which was also citywide data suggests that the city saw also an uptick in high-income households as well, but this area did outpace that, it appears. But that was also at the same time, there was an increase in racial and ethnic diversity here. So the percentage of the population identifying as non-white or Latino rose to 25% in 2022 in this area. The proposal for Montgomery Park would create capacity to accommodate roughly 30% more population over the 2022 population. So this would be introducing new capacity in the area. And we don't know when this would be realized, but we're creating room to grow over and above what occurred over a 12-year period. So this is a substantial increase in capacity. And one of the goals of doing something like this is to decrease displacement pressure in what is a highly desirable area by allowing housing where it's not currently permitted. So this isn't an area where there's housing on the site or even really that close. I mean, there's across Vaughan, there's housing. And then additionally, the provisions of the zoning code and the public benefits agreement is work to ensure that growth makes room for a wide array of incomes. And I'd say that those are different tools than the sort of capacity that was being filled between 2010 and 2022. So there's a lot of, I think the Conway site is one of the areas, and this also touches in the Pearl District. And so those areas didn't have the inclusionary housing provisions. They didn't have, the same type of public benefits agreement that is being pursued here. And so they didn't have those tools to ensure that there is a percentage of affordable housing and other provisions. So that's the approach that we're taking here. And I just wanted to put that in context. Next. Yeah. Tricia. Yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to point out on that last slide also, if we just go back for one quick second, just that last bullet, I'm sure you all were able to read that, but just want to make sure that it's clear that by, through the public benefit agreement and the zoning and the proposal that is encompassed in this plan, the ability to create 200 additional at minimum income restricted units would actually create a 77% increase above the number of income restricted units that are in this broader area today. I think our analysis showed that there are about 257 affordable rent restricted units today. And so this would add 77% more. And I just wanted to make sure to point that out. If we go to the next slide, please. So as was discussed at previous meetings, I wanted to take the opportunity to share with the commission that as we had indicated, we are interested in revising the public benefit agreement terms to include and sort of call out the York Work Group and their role in the future in helping to determine what it means to commemorate York in this area. And so before you is just to show how we are trying to operationalize that, even though the public benefit agreement is not before the commission, just showing here a strikeout and underlined version of the language that's currently in the term sheet and how it would be revised to reflect broader involvement. So the property owners are encouraged through this, they're required to work with the City Arts Program, which is essentially the successor to the Regional Arts Council, through a request for proposal process or other appropriate process to work with the York Group to determine how York will be commemorated. And then this process will result in the funding and installation of one or more features memorializing York and given the location, the geography that's specified here. And then also showing that the 2% for Art program, the funds that will be allocated towards art through the Portland streetcar extension would also be subject to that input and the provisions that the group will come up with in partnership with the property owners. So just wanting to show you that, and this will continue, as you know, to evolve into a full-fledged agreement. So I think does that conclude our slides? Okay, very good.
Yeah.
So thank
Yes.
you. Yeah. Yes.
Patricia, what is the reference to the RFP process getting at in the first
Right.
paragraph?
So the process, and this is something we have to research and investigate more through the process of crafting the full agreement. But there have been changes to the city's arts program, and the sole source contract that was for the Regional Arts Council that did a lot of the managing and administering of arts programs in the city, is now taking the form of smaller requests for proposals. And so what I'm envisioning here is this idea that the property owners and the city, of course, the Bureau would participate in this, but would partner with the arts program to go through some kind of RFP process or other appropriate process that we would have to determine, and have to explore what all the options are. But as a means, as a vehicle to include the York group so that they can be a partner in determining what the improvements in the future will be and what it will mean to incorporate York, what those features will be. Okay. If there are no other questions at the moment, I wanted to just close with a few final remarks that try to summarize. I know over this course of several work sessions, we've provided a lot of different information, and I wanted to just kind of take an opportunity to summarize the main points that we're trying to communicate through all of this information. And then I believe after I'm done, I think Interim Director Eric Engstrom will want to make a few closing remarks as well. So I just wanted to point out that the proposed plan ultimately will create a mixed-use, mixed-income area in Northwest Portland and will improve the income and racial and ethnic diversity of the area by creating more opportunities for housing and affordable housing in a high-opportunity area of the city where there is low risk of displacement. As you heard from staff, the project would add affordable units to the area that represents a 77% increase in the number of income-restricted units that exist in the area currently. The project is consistent with the housing production strategy, which has a number of actions related to creating opportunity in inner and high opportunity areas of the city. It addresses concerns that were actually raised by members of the Planning Commission at the time that the Planning Commission was deliberating on the housing needs analysis. And that concern was that a significant amount of zoning capacity in the city was concentrated in vulnerable areas of the city where infill development could have the potential to have increased displacement pressures for low-income households. So this is consistent with the housing production strategy that acknowledged that there is a need to simultaneously create new opportunities in high opportunity areas. The additional statistics that were just shared with by staff earlier demonstrate that this area is a desirable place to live. There is significant market demand for housing in the area, which has seen a 19% growth in population since 2010. And that is a significantly higher percentage of growth than was seen by the city as a whole, as you heard, which was 8% for that same time frame. This is one of a number of catalytic planning processes and projects that are being planned in the city that together create opportunity for thousands of housing units and significant economic revitalization and post-pandemic recovery. Those include projects such as the Broadway Corridor Project, the I-5 Rose Quarter, Alpine Vision Trust planning process, the OMSI master planning process, the Lloyd Mall redevelopment, and the Lloyd Mall redevelopment. Each of these are very different kinds of projects. They have different and unique circumstances surrounding them, and they represent different models for how plans and projects can be implemented in the city. And we talked at some length about the different models, how projects that have public land and public financing and investment in the private development create different kinds of opportunities, whereas this project is very different than that. And I think we talked at some length about that, and happy to talk about that further if needed. You will see later, and I think you had the chance to review a memo with proposed staff amendments. They're largely technical amendments, but those amendments, in fact, do also incorporate changes to the plan that acknowledge and attribute to the York Group both the cities attribute their work to them, their ideas to them, and also express the city's commitment to continue to support their efforts to achieve their goals in the area. I wanted to also just touch upon the discussion related to the economic opportunities analysis. As you saw from previous presentation by Tom Armstrong, the current adopted economic opportunities analysis currently has a surplus of industrial land to accommodate the 34 acres of land that would be converted to mixed use by the proposed plan. The strategies of the plan and the public benefits agreement retain a jobs focus in the area that offset the loss of the industrial acreage. And we noted them repeatedly, but I'll just note them again very quickly here. They include the requirements for 800 middle wage jobs, mandatory residential floor area, mandatory affordable commercial spaces, and incentives for specific uses that generate and support middle wage jobs, such as industrial service, wholesale sales, and industrial office uses. We also noted in previous presentations that the future EOA will be taking a different approach to addressing how to accommodate job growth and middle wage jobs than perhaps past economic opportunities analyses, and really with a focus on sectors that play to the city's strengths and can be accommodated within the available land supply, because the issue of industrial land, the tight supply of industrial land is not going to be materially changed or affected by this particular action. That's a condition that's going to remain. The most viable and likely uses for the large opportunity sites in the area, if existing zoning is retained, is likely to be large warehouse and distribution uses that will bring significant truck traffic or potentially an electrical substation. That is consistent with the data that Tom has shown about what sectors are growing in the city's industrial land. So I just want to point that out. Also want to just remind the commission that the extension, which is a 0.65 mile distance, a 1.3 mile round trip extension of the streetcar, is cost effective. Is a cost-effective transit opportunity that adds nearly 40% more daily riders to the north-south streetcar line and will connect 30,000 daily riders to major employment centers and educational facilities that are connected by this line. The streetcar extension project will leverage significant federal funding that will not only fund the streetcar extension, but also the reconstruction of 23rd Avenue, the construction of multimodal local streets in the area, the plan area that don't exist today, and will support the purchase of a number of streetcars that will replace the aging streetcars that are used in the network system-wide. And as you heard from our transportation partners, very little, if any, funding from local transportation funds that can be used for transportation projects elsewhere in the city will be used for this project. So as you heard many times about the strategy and the funding sources for the streetcar project. So with that, I will close by saying that we really urge the Planning Commission to pass this proposed plan on to the City Council so that they can deliberate on the plan and the public benefit agreement. And I would also just remind the Commission that the Commission does have as a tool at its disposal the transmittal letter, where you can express and address any outstanding concerns that you would like the Council to consider as they are deliberating on this plan. So with that, I will close and I will invite the Deputy Director, Director Engstrom to make some final remarks.
Let's see. Here we go. I'm still getting my title wrong too, so it's okay. Good afternoon. For the record, Eric Engstrom, Director at BPS. I'm just going to hit on a few points that you've heard as the staff have walked you through this proposal, but just to bring it home at the end. First, I want to mention there's been a lot of discussion about the EOA and how this relates to it. And I want to make it clear that the city is not planning to mitigate the loss of industrial lands in East Portland or anywhere else, frankly, or reduce the level of environmental protection as a result of this plan. The EOA is ultimately about jobs. The strategy in this proposed plan is to set job targets on the site here, regardless of the zone change. And achievement of those targets is built into the plan is actually more solid than any job goals we have for the existing industrial land. As Patricia mentioned, there are outcomes here with no change that would have no jobs. The current proposal has a lot fewer impacts in terms of industrial land than, and a much reduced potential for private gain, frankly, in the current economic market compared to what we were looking at in 2019. The 2019 preliminary racial equity analysis was based on a significantly different streetcar alignment, which with substantially greater amount of industrial land conversion. So our first priority here was to actually reduce that impact by reducing the loss of industrial land. That was a big takeaway from that report, was to reduce the amount of industrial land that we were converting. It took place in a substantially different economic environment, as you all know. So I want to make sure you're considering that as you evaluate the current proposal against that 2019 report. And thank you, Barry, for itemizing the way that we did respond. Central Portland needs a shot in the arm in terms of investor confidence. Given the reduced impact on industrial land with this proposal and the on-site jobs strategy, there's not much to be gained by setting aside this until the EOA is complete. That will not change the outcome, and it will delay development for years. Again, the opportunity here is to enable a largely private sector development investment to move forward with little public subsidy. That will have enormous benefits in terms of reinforcing investor confidence and providing proof that large-scale development can be successful again in Inner Portland. We need a signal that we're willing to do that and work with the private sector now, not in 2028 or 2030. The big move here, again, is putting more housing in a high-opportunity location. There are two sides to fighting housing inequity: fighting the displacement where it's impacting existing communities, but then also opening up development of housing in areas that are close to jobs and urban services where there isn't going to be displacement. So we want to keep our eye on both sides of that opportunity. There's not a lot of public resources going into this plan. This is not like the Broadway corridor where there was significant tax increment financing, urban renewal investment, or public ownership of land. In this case, the biggest public inputs are the federal funds, which we'll be seeking for the streetcar, and the local match, which largely is coming from an LID, which ultimately the private sector pays into. So we need to also set our expectations accordingly, given that, calibrating the tools to what we're actually doing. And I want to thank staff again for their work on this.
Great.
Commissioners, yes, Chair Romero, we kick it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation and for the comments and closing remarks. I'd like to now proceed with comments and take a bit of a straw poll from commissioners around where we are with this proposal at this time. And based on that, we will either proceed to the amendments presentation or determine next steps. So to do that, I'm actually going to go alphabetically since we're all here in person. And so to kick it off, I didn't give him warning, but to my left would be Commissioner Alexander. And then just in case you need to know where you are in line, I'll go ahead and list us out. Commissioner Lang, and myself, Chair O'Meara, Commissioner Patel, Vice Chair Pouncil, Commissioner Routh, Commissioner Spivak, and then Vice Chair Thompson.
Thank you, I think.
You're welcome.
Mike Alexander for the record. First of all, I do want to thank staff for the work that went into sort of pulling together not only your presentations, but recirculating the racial equity analysis. There was some foundational pieces that went into that were very helpful in sort of answering some questions that were in my mind and some that I ended up sort of rising at. I was drawn to one of the comments that talked about potentially increasing population density in the area by 20%, if I remembered that, or am I restating it or misstating it?
I think we're saying that this represents a 30% increase
30%.
in the population.
Yeah, in the population.
Right. And I understand that's
Yeah.
a forecast and it's looking at sort of
Sure.
impacts, but I'm always interested in if you unpack that number, who are that 30%? Are we further reinforcing the sort of disparity between income levels that exist now? are any of these focus points around the racial equity analysis and the intent of it targeted towards shifting the proportional impact of underserved and under-resourced communities. That was the point of my comment last time, that I would love to be able to have my grandkids look back at this space and see that this desirable neighborhood became possible for people who would not have been there historically. And so I'm trying to get a sense, a number is a number, but let's unpack it. And for me, that speaks to intentionality. So that would be my additional perspective. You know, again, I think that the work that was done, I think the commentary, the recommendations are on point, but there's aspiration and there's execution. And I'm trying to get a sense of the latter.
Commissioner Alexander, I think, oh yeah. No, should we just keep going? Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know if you wanted to, let's go ahead and keep going. That's totally fine. Yeah, absolutely.
No. It's not a question, but it is a response. And I've thought, you know, again, long and hard about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. But there's better that's sort of located in between, and that is where I'm focused right now.
Commissioner Lang.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments, Commissioner. I like what you said. I think that makes a lot of sense to boil that down further and understand what our goal is now for the future of that area. And to that, I had a question when we talk about 800 middle wage jobs for that industrial area. And so down the road, say that land sits fallow for 10, 15 years and a company comes along and it's, you know, they want to build this manufacturing plant there, which is great. They're going to build widgets. And they need a lot of space, but at the end, it only employs 200 people, maybe 300 people, falling far short of any, you know, kind of projections or hopes or desires for that area. What does the city do in a case like that, where we're telling people now we want 800 well-paying jobs, and the reality is there's just nobody willing to come in and build something that would create that many jobs? Where do you go with that?
Patricia, I could maybe just comment on that from a broad perspective and then ask you to follow up. But with our primary responsibility when we're thinking about the EOA, or just broadly speaking zoning, is to make sure there's capacity for jobs. The EOA is not a tool to guarantee jobs. It's making sure we have capacity in the right places, and that's sort of the end of the story. So there is no follow-up in terms of the standard industrial zoning that we put in place is what it is. And then at the end of the planning period, we reevaluate and figure out if there's a changing context. What we're doing with this plan is something different than that, and trying to, with the zone change, put in some specific goals. And Patricia maybe could comment on that.
Yeah, Patricia Diefendorfer for the record. So again, the provisions of the public benefit agreement work hand in hand with the zoning. The zoning requires the non-residential square footage, and then the public benefit agreement commitment. This would be something that the property owners or future developers would be bound to, and they would be required to either help generate 800 middle wage jobs, or if you were able to have a chance to read the term sheet, they would pay on a per job basis for any jobs that are not on site, pay into funds that are managed by, and programs that are managed by Prosper Portland that would pay for job training and workforce development. So that's the arrangement. So I think to one of Eric's previous points about, you know, if the land were industrial, or if it were zoned, whatever it was zoned without the public benefit agreement, there would be no real clear requirement as to the number of jobs, right? Through this process, we actually have a situation in which we have a job requirement, or the remedy to that is to pay into a fund to support workforce development and job training.
Wade Lang for the record. Has that been used in the past and has it been successful?
Well, I think that this approach, this value capture approach that we're taking in the use of this public benefit agreement is unique to this project, really, and this is something that we're trying here as a way to capture public benefits from the public actions that are being taken. I mean, I think, the workforce development programs, I'm sure they have their own statistics about what the success rates of those programs are. But this approach is a different approach, something that we're trying, but it is something that the property owners and/or the developers in the future will be bound to do.
Thank you. Okay, it's my turn. Well, I know I've expressed appreciation for the many years of work and dedication to this project. I am in support of the project. I think that, going back to Commissioner Alexander's very important question, when I think about just my observations of the plan area when I was in graduate school for urban planning, I'll reveal the year. It was 2007, a while ago. I worked in the neighborhood for Neighbors West Northwest. And just in that short amount of time, we've seen this area really transform from what I would observe was more of a kind of working class, middle class to now very high income. And so from my perspective, we need public action to reintroduce some equity and equity expectations via these zoning changes and the affordable housing production goals that are being mandated essentially by a public benefits agreement, which doesn't typically happen in the city. As an affordable housing developer, I can go and choose pretty much any site if the zoning's there to develop, and there's not a mandate telling me to do that, right? And so in this package before us, there's actually an important consideration and priority put to that. I also think with the expansion of the streetcar line, we're on the cusp here of an area that's already a complete high opportunity area, and this allows us to think forward into the future and really be able to take one of the most accessible transit options and expand that. So I completely understand and appreciate all of the thought and consideration that all of my commissioners have brought to this, and I am in support and really hope today that we can determine whether or not we will be making a recommendation to move forward via our discussion and deliberation, and hopefully we'll give staff the opportunity to present amendments, which I know have also been worked on very diligently. So with that, I see Commissioner Lang has a question for me, maybe.
Well, yeah, did you want our kind of,
That's what I was hoping. I think I'm getting kind of a temperature check as we go through, but if commissioners would like to jump back in who have spoken and because that's what we're trying to determine here is, are we at a place where we can actually vote today, or are we making a different decision?
well, and I'd like to just follow up and say that I'm certainly in support of this as well.
All right, well, let me go back and Mike Alexander for the record and sort of close my loop out. I use an expression every once in a while where I say I'm in violent agreement with a proposal. And this is one where I'm in violent agreement. I do think that the last provision that Patricia made to have council pay particular attention to areas where we would like to see greater focus and investment allow me to sort of say I would rather be a proponent than a barrier to moving it forward. So in a long way, I would say aye, but not without some concern.
Thank you for asking that clarifying question and revisiting with your indications of support. And so with that, Commissioner Patel, you're up next.
Yeah, so first, I mean, I really want to thank staff for all the years involved behind the scenes in preparing this plan. I think, the plan with the proposed amendments is thoughtfully prepared and pretty comprehensive. And like Chair O'Meara said, taking a step back, the plan really goes beyond the normal course and the typical course of things by really incorporating community considerations, and also setting the stage for more housing and jobs. As I read the plan in more detail and the amendments, I think it does a good job of carefully transitioning a rather underutilized area that we all seem to agree with to a more vibrant mixed use neighborhood that again supports more housing and jobs while also retaining some industrial land for job retention. And I think those priorities are priorities that Portland really needs right now. And for those reasons, I'm leaning in support of the package in its entirety.
Thank you. Vice Chair Pansel.
Okay, yeah, I would reiterate what everyone said too about staff, and the hard work is definitely seen in the planning of this, and I'm actually quite excited to see the uptick in vitality in the area. I think it's exciting. I live in the area as well, so I definitely am. I benefit from all the I call it a urban Disneyland. But in saying that, I like where this is going. It feels like it could be a wonderful thing for not just Portland to see, but also for the nation to really see. And I know that we have done some amazing things when it comes to equity in our government, doing racial equity analysis. And I'm aware that, there have been a variety of other cities that have seen us as an example and have taken what we've done and used it in their own municipalities. So with that, I feel as though that it's really important that there is a, a real push to be, I guess, within the spirit of the, which I think to a degree that does exist, but I think there needs to be more of a robust spirit of the 2019 racial equity analysis that was done. There was some things that I thought that could be used in this planning for MPH2, especially with the knowledge of knowing that that's why, MPH2 is why the equity, the racial equity plan was created. It was created for this project. So, I'm super grateful for having the opportunity to be able to actually, do some of the hard work. I mean, this is really difficult. And I know it's probably difficult for staff as well, but it's difficult to know our history and know that there are tools that we can use and not really feel that those tools are being used in their best practice. I think it's important that we don't look at bare minimums of doing these projects, because I do believe that the world is watching us, and we do make an example, and that's one of the reasons why I love Portland. So right now, I'm feeling like I'm not really wanting to move forward. I think there should be some more deliberation, and yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Thank you. Next up, Commissioner Routh.
Commissioner Routh, for the record. So I've rarely felt more vacillating on any project than I have on this one. I have found so many friends in the last 3 days, people who disagree with each other, some people who disagree with themselves through different parts of that conversation. So I really want to I'll just appreciate staff the same. Because this has been a long time, you know, we've had, you know, a hearing. This is our second work session, but this has been for many years, and this is not the first time that this has come before the Planning Commission. So I'm going to take a bit, but that's fine. So things that I have heard that really, I'll just say, Erica, I'm on the fence. I'm hard M, so you can put that down. Still, and the best form of the yes argument that I have heard is that we are best as a city when we have a vision that is implementable, right? That we have, when we are placemaking, we have developed, we are able to operationalize our delight and the idea of what it means to belong in this city. And I think if this project were not rezoning from industrial, this would be a lot easier for me. I do come back on the EOA, and so Eric, thank you for bringing that up. I heard you say that you know, if we're looking at climate protections, you know, on industrial land, that will not, that does not have a demonstrable impact on what our buildable land inventory will look like on the 20-year timeline. Am I understanding what you said correctly?
I think what I'm saying is that the yes or no on this project doesn't have a demonstrable impact. There's still going to be trade-offs about what we do with industrial land going forward, and robust debate, as you said. Some of us disagree with ourselves on some of those points.
Right.
Yeah, I'm saying that I don't think this decision will throw the EOA one way or the other in any meaningful way.
Okay. Yeah, because the other question, obviously, I'm an East Portlander, you know, having grown up in Park Rose, and you know what industrial land has meant in East Portland. One, I don't want to see that revisited in Northwest, but I think, you know, what are some of the trade-offs across different parts of the city are things that I am thinking about and having conversations about. The other piece, when we're talking about more middle wage jobs, I think to your point, Commissioner Lang, like what is a good job? What is a good job is a question I think that is also active in the EOA conversation and is active here. And how do we relate to industry? And so all that to say, I think also I'm swayed by, I'm swaying. But Commissioner Lang, when you shared, you know, if not this, then what happens? Like if we don't have a place, if we do not create this intentionally, is this, an active question, I'm having with folks related to the EOA is, you know, the uptick in warehouse distribution. You know, is that a good job? Like, are those good jobs? And if we're talking about distribution, how does that impact transportation and other public health issues in this area? I honestly don't know where I am right now, but those are the things that are weighing on me. If not this, I mean, we have in this project the opportunity to help shape. We don't get to choose whether something changes. We get to influence how it changes. If we do not take this intentional step, what is the alternative? And I would be curious if there are thoughts on what that might look like, because we're at a fork in the road. Does this make sense? We're at this fork, and I don't want. We can talk about. I love the violent agreement concept of, you know, what is before us. How can we make it the best version of itself? That's a conversation to have, and also I think the thing that I'm still not understanding is if we say no to this right now, what happens with this space? So those are the questions that are still open for me. Thank you very much. I am an M.
Commissioner Spivak.
I was losing track. Thank you. Let's see. And this project I guess name a couple things. This reminds me when I was first considering getting on the Planning Commission back in the day. Like, someone described it to me, either Chris Smith or Mike Halk. The Planning Commission gets to talk about policy, umpires, is it politically aligned? And we don't do politics, right? That's politics, and the city council gets the last bite at the apple. And sometimes it doesn't work quite that way, because there's clearly some political impetus to get something to happen at the Planning Commission. And this is a project where that political side sort of knows its way in there, I think. I feel lobbied a little bit, not just from people who testify, but from staff. We see who's in the room. We have some, and I think that probably has something to do with what the shot in the arm. I mean, like, we're in a city where it's hard to build any kind of market rate housing right now. And there's 100 reasons we all know why there's a lot of interest in getting housing done. So I just want to acknowledge that that's what it feels like. It's not the first time. We've had other projects that were politically, like Shelter to Housing program, for example, was one where it was very clear that we were getting lobbied. Another is that process and product is another thought I have, is because I think that I like the product, and I think the process had some stumbles in it. So I feel like I wasn't in the room when it happened, but it feels like the folks with the York Street Work Group had early interaction with city, felt, I don't know what, there's different sides of every story, right? But they seem to have felt excluded or left out, or they didn't get what they wanted in the proposal, some combination of those things. And it seems like since then, staff has done a lot to try and sort of get those things, some more things into the proposal, which I appreciate. But the first stumble, if it was a stumble, creates communication and trust issues that could continue on. Another thing I thought of is that this project's not that big. We could have toured it. So we could have had Commissioner Pouncil could have given the tour. But that was just a thought that maybe for future projects of geographic area. I know the area because I buy stuff for my construction business there. But it would have been amenable to a tour. I would highly recommend people watch the Remembering York video. It's like 10 minutes long. If you haven't seen it already, it's awesome. And I think that although I came in with sort of apprehensions around the sequencing of the EOA in this project, I'm convinced that we should not wait on the EOA and the potential cloud that could happen over it if it's appealed to LUBA. I think that in terms of the York remembrance and commemoration, I think it's a great opportunity. I mean, I hope that the folks in the group can team up with a African-American developer to do a lot of housing there with a York Village urban theme. And maybe that's how the district achieves some of the affordable housing requirements for the public benefit initiative. So I can't obviously snap my fingers for that to happen, but I think that this sets up the potential for there to be an urban village at that location. The benefits agreement, I think I shared this last time. I feel like out of respect for the economic analysis, which sort of assumes that the market's doing well, I can see these benefits being reasonable. In today's market or any market, I can sort of see they seem big. Like to go beyond inclusionary housing, to provide 200 units of affordable housing with no city subsidy. I think they'll probably get subsidy from somewhere else. To provide mixed-use projects when we know commercial doesn't pay very well in a project. Residential, people actually show up for that. And if you don't do that, you have to pay some money in lieu of the jobs. That's a lot of things that are going to be required at this site, but will not be required in the rest of the city. So I do have the sort of concern that this level of expectation from the development community might prevent development from happening there. But I will trust the people who did the analysis, and they can figure that out as we go further. And I think that if we do go to amendments, I had a small one related to managing parking on the street, but I will leave it until then. So I guess I'd say that I've had some concerns with process, but I think the product is good. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Chair Thompson.
I guess I can't move this closer. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. No, it's on there, good. Okay, I, like a few others on the commission, have felt very, very conflicted about this plan and the vote today. I've been feeling kind of anguished, I think is the best word to describe it. Because I agree with others that I think that the plan's aspirations do a lot of good things towards advancing the comp plan goals, promoting housing affordability in a high opportunity area. We heard more about that today. Expanding a low carbon transportation system in a very cost effective fashion, providing for mixed employment opportunities. And I also want to recognize that I think it is, it's innovative and exciting to see the use of something like a public benefits agreement with private property owners, which it sounds like is very novel. And I think that may be why we're just kind of figuring this out as we go. I do still have some pretty serious reservations about supporting the plan, and the tough thing about this has been that I can't derive an amendment to address those concerns because of the public benefits agreement existing as this separate piece. And so I think that that's what's been particularly difficult about trying to understand the path forward here. The first concern is the community engagement process with BIPOC affiliated groups in particular. As we all heard through this process, there's a citywide history of exclusion in planning and zoning. And at this location in particular, Giles Lake, and also what is intended to be the future point of commemoration for York, it seems really important here to prioritize the comp plan goals that are related to meaningful participation and a transparent and inclusive process. And I think that staff have taken some steps in the past couple of days or weeks to recognize the York Group in the term sheet and to promote their involvement in placemaking. And I think that's an important first step. But at the end of the day, I've been feeling pretty concerned that the community-based organizations that the city selected to collaborate with on this project to fulfill the racial equity goals that were set out at the very beginning, they don't support it, and that's a tough spot to be in. And I guess the question that's embedded in all of this for me is it goes back to this idea of aspiration and execution. And I think that the aspirations are sound. I think that the execution is a question. We'll never know. We'll never know how many jobs could be on the site if we don't, recommend this and it doesn't move forward. If we do, and the plan is approved by City Council as proposed and amended, there's no guarantee that any of those jobs will materialize. And so I think we just have to acknowledge that, this isn't about a particular project. It's a plan that tries to set up certain conditions for a certain outcome to happen. And I think the missing piece in there for me is who is at the table, and I think that I think it's like from the disability rights movement, there's this there's nothing for us without us kind of thinking. And so it's concerning to me that the York group hasn't felt meaningfully included in the process. And to go back to the question that I have is whether or not there is a barrier to achieving that here. If there is a way to revisit the public benefit term sheet in a way that perhaps mitigates some of the pretty substantial requirements, that Eli alluded to being difficult in many economic environments, but also helps to bring the York group in. And I don't know if there's an actual barrier to that happening or not, if there's a barrier to, the willingness of the property owners to participate in something that is a little bit more transparent and collaborative in that way. Yeah, I think we've talked about this quite a bit already, but the industrial lands piece and the racial equity analysis and the notion that with the loss of industrial jobs, it exacerbates racial wealth disparities. And we, of course, have the 800 jobs that we're targeting, but it's a question of what is a good job, and what we're losing and what we heard in testimony is going to potentially be lost by some, just feeling like it's a difficult place to be with the absence of an EOA to help guide us through that. Yeah, so the last thing that I would mention that I feel is a little bit curious is that I just didn't feel like there was a strong outpouring of support for the housing piece of this, which was just kind of odd to me as I think about, we are always met with these situations where comp plan goals can sometimes compete with each other. And we've got our engagement and equity piece, we've got industrial and economic development, we've got housing. And I would have felt better about supporting this with enthusiasm if we had more housing advocates, turning out to provide testimony and saying, this is really important that we do this, that we create the potential for these 4,400 units in this high opportunity area. And so it's been a little bit of a head scratcher for me that, we did hear some, it wasn't maybe what I had expected. So reluctantly, I think I'm leaning towards a no vote, and I'm less interested in being a barrier to moving this forward. But I am interested in signaling to City Council and to staff that I think that there is even more work that could be done, particularly around the public benefits agreement. And I just have some concern at the end of the day that given the testimony that we heard, going down like a path of unanimous approval, like green light, again, there's a lot of good things here, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners, for those comments and all of the thoughtful deliberation and time that everyone's invested into your considerations. I think we can proceed to the amendments presentation based on what I've heard. And so that's what I would recommend, is that we go ahead and have staff present the amendments. I also heard Commissioner Spivak state that you had an amendment that I assume you've sent to staff, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and proceed to the staff presentation.
Great. Thanks, Chair O'Mara and commissioners. I'm bringing up slides. We sent a memo out on July 3rd that had 16 amendments that we were proposing to the plan and associated documents. Most of those were staff proposed amendments in response to some technical issues that we discovered and wanted to correct, but also in response to some of the conversation that we heard from the commission, and also Commissioner Spivak's specific amendment. So what we'd like to do, I think the way we'd like to do this is we have a PowerPoint we have these amendments on slides for you, and we'd like to just walk through them with you. We think that technical amendments, and some of them can be grouped more successfully than other ones, but maybe take some of the technical ones as a group and get your feedback on those and see whether they will be incorporated as part of the plan. And we've got 16 of them to go through. So I don't know if we can share. I'm still sharing, but I'm not online yet sharing, so. Pardon me? There we go. So, and I should ask commissioners if anybody would need a paper copy of these amendments to go through this. We have them available if you're interested. Just let us know and we can get you a copy. So Amendment 1 are amendments, technical amendments to the Volume 1 of the plan. Pretty simple. We're adding a map of the Northwest District area, Northwest 23rd Avenue properties where plan district changes apply. This is essentially showing areas where streetcar-oriented regulations would apply in the Northwest Plan District area within approximately 200 feet of Northwest 23rd Avenue. So that's a technical amendment. Those regulations apply along the existing streetcar line on Northup and Lovejoy, and we're just extending those to this area. And then 1B is to clarify plan text regarding the Northwest Town Center boundary. That is really just a clarification about how that boundary applies, and it will show on the comprehensive plan map as opposed to the urban design framework map. So. Sure. I think 1A and 1B together, yes. Yeah.
Okay, I apologize. I thought we were going to hear all 16. So we do need
We
a
could do
motion.
them if
Actually, I would ask the commissioners if you read them, Barry can you don't have to. I'm just asking, do you feel like you need him to go through in that level of detail, or can we just have them on the screen? Barry can read them. If there's questions, we can field questions. But if you've read the memo, I feel like we don't need to do this level of detail.
Right. But also we can group them a little bit more.
Yeah, and do
take
we want
them-
to group them by slide, at least for this first slide, Amendment 1 and 2? I'm seeing nodding.
I think we
and-
should group them by volume. Shouldn't we group them by volume? Are they presented by volume?
they are presented by volume, but there are some within volume 1 that have thematically are different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
then just do it that way, but let's try to group them as much as possible. Yeah.
sure.
And to clarify, are you wanting separate votes for each amendment slide that's presented, or will we vote on the entire package at the end?
That's that was the
Yeah.
question I was getting at.
Yeah.
You do need a vote on each amendment. You can group them together how you want them to be. Like, so you could, Barry, if you want to go through Amendment 2 here, then you can vote on Amendments 1 and 2. Or as Patricia suggested, you can go through everything in Volume 1 and have them vote on all of Volume 1 amendments.
I think it might make sense to do them slide by slide. I think that's a pretty efficient way to do it.
Okay. Does that make sense for commissioners?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike Alexander, I would recommend, for me, this is anything that triggers the rule of outrage, I will raise my hand. Anything short of that, let's just move.
Okay. So Amendment 2, I'll just continue on this slide and we can move forward on it. Relate to the Urban Design Framework amendments. Through the Design Commission process, and by the way, the Design Commission did forward their letter recommending the application of the design overlay. There were some changes made, and Cassie Ballou from our urban design staff has made updates to the urban design framework map and other sub-area numbering and lettering consistent with the Design Commission's recommendation. We're also updating the park diagram. So would the commission like to make a motion on these two amendments? Or
Is there a
groups of two
motion for
amendments?
these amendments as displayed to commission?
Second?
Okay, but that was Commissioner Lang. I'm sorry, I missed who. Oh, I will make the motion. I can do that. I will make the motion to approve the amendments as presented Volume 1 before us,
Sorry, who was?
and it was
I'll
seconded
second.
by Commissioner Spivak.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor?
We need.
Oh, we need roll
no-
call.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Okay, roll call, please, Julie.
Yes, Alexander,
Aye.
Lang,
Aye.
Umera,
Aye.
Patel,
Aye.
Council, Routh,
Aye.
Spivak,
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Okay, these amendments are approved.
Great, let's go to the next slide. These are action table amendments. The plan has an action table in it. The first first two are very technical. We're creating a new community engagement section in the action table. 3B, we would move action item PB3, which is currently, we would move that to the community engagement section. It has more to do with community engagement than it does with public benefit. And then we would add the new community engagement action CE2 in support of future York Street work group efforts in the plan area. So expressing cities' interest in pursuing actions with them and support for the York group. And then the 3D is one that Commissioner Spivak might like to speak to.
Sure, I think it's a pretty minor one, but it could come up again, so I'll just say the context. When we were introduced to this project, the description of how is the city going to manage parking on the street came up. And as proposed, if the parking, and this is outside my area of expertise, so I had to learn a little bit about this. Once we got to 85% usage of the curb, then it would prompt a discussion of, there might be a vote by the people who live there or by city council, I wasn't totally sure, to start managing street parking and potentially set meters. And that flag to me is like, it's kind of odd. You have things you have to get really bad, and then you have a vote, and then it's likely to be a contentious vote, whether it's local residents or city council. So my hope was that we could just empower PBOT to manage parking as needed based on as demand increases, rather than let it get bad and then get to a vote. They couldn't quite go that far, but they did say that at least we would commit to creating a district, set clarify that the expectation is that there will be metered parking in this district, in the new streets in the area. And the city has some good reasons why they didn't want to like set up the district right now to have a formal signal, because they don't know if this is going to be an expansion of an existing district or a new district there. So short of being able to pin that down, I think that a little stronger language for empowerment of PBOT is helpful.
So,
Okay.
Yep.
I make a motion to, oh, is there a clarifying question?
Yeah,
ahead,
I was
Vice Chair.
just curious about 3C, and would this, I'm just kind of wondering, like, would this be something that would be ongoing, like being created, or is there a plan that's in set now on how this community engagement will actually happen? And if there isn't, I would like to make a suggestion.
There isn't a plan set yet, but this indicates our interest in supporting those efforts on an ongoing basis to make sure that there's support from city staff for the York group to pursue efforts to create a more inclusive community.
Okay.
Commissioner, Vice Chair Pouncil, just as a reminder, if you recall the slide that that Ryan shared about the different ways in which planning staff and bureau staff more generally support community-based organizations, whether it's, for example, writing letters of support if the community group is seeking grant funding. So it's that kind of support that we're talking about. But if you have any idea that you'd want to proffer, we're happy to hear about that.
Could we get actually on the screen the actual amendment? Because this is a commentary.
In front of me, so.
Thank you for clarifying that, Commissioner Spivak. I think it's important to note this is an action table. This is in the plan. So these are not part of the ordinance. Exactly. Yeah.
I don't have the slide with that actual amendment in front of me, but I could read it to you, and that might be helpful. Sure. Bear
Staff
with
will
me
bring
while
up
I put this
the
up.
memo and share screen of the memo itself, and we can show you the language that way.
I found it on page 6.
Here we go. Yeah. Well, this should be it coming up now.
Takes a beat.
Getting that?
Yeah. There we go.
There we go. Sorry about the delay. That's the amendment, or the action item itself and the language that's proposed.
We have a to seek resources.
Oh,
We'll,
I'm sorry. We have a correction. There's a correction memo that came out
that's right.
yesterday. So this is, sorry, this is the previous version where there's repeated words in here. So let me get the other one up. Bear with me another second.
Actually, you can just edit that
Yeah, I could do that, certainly,
Strike it.
yeah.
right there.
There we go. It would be this. Oh, I got the PDF.
Oh, is it?
I think it's probably clear to commission
That's
that
fine.
that
That's
repeated language will be
is stricken in
removed.
the correction memo that you got yesterday
Yes.
from us.
Thank
So I
you.
apologize for bringing up the other version of it. This has every other amendment in it, yes.
This is Commissioner Thompson. I was struggling to understand where this fits into what is this table snapshot? Like, what is the bigger context? I was trying to understand.
Yeah.
Patricia mentioned it's not part of ordinance, so is this something we're actually amending then?
There,
Go ahead. It's
action tables at the end of the plan include a host of different actions. Some of them are adopted with the plan that suggest, the zoning changes or other aspects of the developing a public benefit agreement, things of that nature. They're adopted typically by resolution by council, but they show intent for future work from staff as intended by the city. So kind of a policy intent set of actions. So this would be expressing our interest in doing this, and people could come back and request that we pursue these actions.
to Patricia Diefender for the record, just to clarify, I think these are tables at the end of which volume of
Volume 1, sorry, I
volume one
wasn't
of
clear
the
on that.
plan.
yes.
So that's the plan portion of the documents. And those, you are amending them because you are recommending that council adopt the plan. So you would be amending that council adopt this revised language. That component of the plan is adopted by resolution because it's not, regulatory. Yeah.
Or sometimes they're adopted as non-binding policy in an ordinance, but they're expressions of intent.
The action tables are a typical one of the tools that we use inside plans in addition to the code language or the mapping changes and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Council, did that help with your question? And did you still want to offer?
Well, I guess I just wanted to
comment?
make a suggestion, and basically just to reference the 2019 racial equity plan and how you go about engaging with community groups and making sure that they are in the room when decisions are being made.
Yeah, I think that we can find a way to work some of that language of referencing the racial equity plan into the action item.
Okay, thank you. Another question, go ahead.
Wade Lang for the record. Two things. Does this become a template for future planning areas, future developments and stuff? Will this be something that you take and utilize elsewhere? Or is this specific to Montgomery Park area plan?
These action tables would be specific to the Montgomery Park area plan.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you say the York Work Group and other community organizations. Are there other community organizations? And why wouldn't they be named?
There are several community organizations that do work in this area. They could include everything from neighborhood or business associations to the industrial business associations to other community-based organizations that might have an interest in this area, such as Friendly House that maybe did some of our initial outreach. But the York Group was certainly the group that we were focused on because they were active participants in this effort and certainly have been an active.
But they weren't the only one.
They were not the only group that had offered feedback throughout our process, but they've certainly been prominent in the last
So,
post-discussion draft aspects of the process.
yeah, just to clarify, I mean, I think the main thing is that if the York group or any other group is seeking support in some way to create greater inclusivity in the area. I mean, so I think that's what that's basically saying. It's not naming other groups because no other groups have specifically, indicated that kind of interest. I mean, they were involved in the engagement and they gave their input. And but if any other group were interested in advancing some of the same things that we're talking about here, that there would be similar treatment of those groups.
Okay, so I think we go back to the amendment slide, but my clarifying question is with Vice Counsel's recommendation. Does that change the proposed amendment language?
Commissioner, it changes the language, but I think we just ask that you give us the latitude to make that change after.
So I can refer in the motion that we are approving the amendment with the suggestion as made by Vice Chair Counsel.
Yes.
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
that there's just more integration,
Of the
basically.
racial equity,
Yeah.
preliminary racial equity analysis.
Yeah, and also, with, if you're going to be working with the York group as well, that it is integrated into the language.
Okay, could we have the amendment slide back up? Thank you, Barry.
Sorry.
I know you're having to do a lot of navigation there live, so thank you for doing that.
I think we are on this one. Yes, we're back. Okay. There you go.
Okay, so I will make a motion to approve the amendments as presented to us, 3A through 3C and 3D as part of Volume 1. 3C will include revised language as recommended by Vice Chair Counsel and noted in record. Is there a second?
Routh seconds.
Okay, roll call, please, Julie.
Alexander.
Aye.
Lang.
Aye.
O'Meara.
Aye.
Patel.
Aye.
Council.
Aye.
Routh.
Aye.
Spivak.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Thank you. These amendments are approved.
Okay. The next group are also amendments to Volume 1 of the plan, Amendment 4, 5, and 6. These all are amendments to the text of the plan document itself, referencing York's group's contributions to development of the plan and their involvement, attributing renaming of Northwest York Street to Ron Craig, as was brought to our attention in the testimony, and then referencing York group participation in public benefits agreement element summary that ultimately will be carried forward in the agreement. I think these three could be taken together as well, and I have that amendments memo if people need to see the exact language, or we have paper copies again.
Any clarifying questions on this set? Okay. I'm making a motion to approve the Volume 1 amendments 4 through 6 as presented on the slide. Do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Alexander seconds. Roll call, please, Julie.
Alexander.
Aye.
Lang.
Aye.
O'Meara.
Aye.
Patel.
Aye.
Council.
Aye.
Routh.
Aye.
Spivak.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
The volume 2 amendments. altogether?
Yeah, we could try to take volume 2, which is the zoning code amendments. Most of them are technical. Some of them are a little bit more substantive, but Amendment 7 they're very technical, just changing terminology and correcting a percentage standard in the urban green features element. Amendment 8 clarifies how standards along the Main Street and streetcar alignments would apply. This relates to the location and character of parking and loading areas near the streetcar. We had initially applied them broadly along the entire streetcar line. In earlier generation, they got separated, and we're reconfiguring them so that these parking and standards apply along the streetcar line in its entirety. Amendment 9 clarifies some aspects of the non-residential use requirement. I think this one's worth noting. It basically would make the non-residential use requirement apply to all development that occurs in the area. Previously, the way it was expressed was new development, which would, the way our code operates, have excluded additions or augmentations of development on large sites. And we want to make sure that those sites, the regulation for non-residential use applies so that we maintain that jobs aspect of the plan. And then finally, we were proposing to allow some floor area for affordable housing buildings to count towards that non-residential use requirement. We exempted them from having to comply with it, but it didn't change the overall requirement. So we're saying that some portion of the floor area in a affordable housing building could count towards and reduce the non-residential use requirement. So if you had a large site, a piece of it would apply. Amendment 10, there is a minor one in the residential employment buffer area between the EG and the EX zones, where we're proposing to allow fences in that area to help with some separation if need be. Other structures are not allowed in that area. And Amendment 11 would replace the bonus option approval criteria for Subdistrict B, which asked for the additional floor area to demonstrate service adequacy, and it had several different aspects to that service adequacy. And in conversations with our partner bureaus, it was determined that really transportation adequacy was the goal of this particular bonus criteria. So we revised it to focus on transportation criteria only. And I think, yes, those are all the zoning code amendments. So if you have questions, we'd be happy to dive into detail. Otherwise, I think you could take these together.
Any questions on the Volume 2 zoning code amendments? Okay, I move that we approve the Volume 2 zoning code amendments as presented to us. And is there a second? Commissioner Lang. Roll call, please, Julie.
Alexander?
Aye.
Lang?
Aye.
O'Meara?
Aye.
Patel?
Aye.
Council?
Aye.
Routh?
Aye.
Spivak?
Aye.
Thompson?
Aye.
Volume 2 amendments are approved.
Thank you. And I think the last batch here are amendments to Volume 3, which is the transportation plan. Several different amendments here. 12 adds right-of-way standard recommendations for Northwest York Street. 13, refining Northwest Vaughn Street project recommendations. This is to align with some of the Design Commission's discussions and recommendations. Amendment 14 reclassifies Northwest Nikolai and St. Helens Road to an industrial road. And 15 refines the freight district boundary as this area evolves from a industrial area to a more mixed-use employment area. That designation is changing. And 16 revises the emergency response street classifications in the area. And those are detailed in the memo to a greater degree. If commissioners have any questions about those, we could also call PBOT project staff.
Commissioner Lang.
Commissioner Lang, for the record. Industrial Road, what is that?
I'm going to defer to my colleagues at PBOT, so bear with us a second.
Sean Canny for the record.
transportation planner at PBOT. Thanks for the question. An industrial road is a design classification within the transportation system plan, so it just emphasizes industrial uses and truck access and movement on that road. So in this instance, we're emphasizing that, trying to ensure that we are treating Vaughan as something that's stitching together the neighborhood, and as we adjust that industrial district boundary, that we really emphasize through future policy direction and future design on any work on that street that it does emphasize and support industrial and freight movement as needed.
Does that change the dimensions of the road at all, or access to public right-of-way?
It honestly depends. Typically, no. Typically, we work within the right-of-way that we already have when we're redesigning streets, but there's no intention to do any work on that street immediately. That would just be policy direction through the street design classifications for future work that may occur on the area as the area develops and changes over time.
I do have a question. Yeah, could you maybe explain a little bit on that right-of-way standard recommendation for Northwest York Street? I know that there's kind of rail in that area, right? Is that like removal or?
That's a great question. So the recommendations already include the removal of the abandoned railway spur that's in the area, as that street would be triggered by redevelopment, essentially. What this does is responds to the urban design direction in Volume 1, where there is a desire to maintain loading docks on Northwest York Street that exist currently, similar to those in the Pearl District. So this would essentially direct us to develop special standards for the right-of-way for these so that we can somehow match accessibility requirements and the maintenance or the preservation of these historic loading docks in the area as it redevelops.
Commissioner Routh, for the record, I'm unfamiliar with revising emergency response street classifications. Does that require sign-off from first responding?
That is a great question. So right now, no, because this recommendation essentially would be bundled as a recommendation to City Council. And then when we come back to Planning Commission as part of our next transportation system plan update, we would go through that process of ensuring that it's happening. But these current technical amendments essentially are just trying to reduce modal conflicts while also ensuring that we can guarantee quick response in the area as it redevelops as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Great questions. I move that we approve Volume 3 amendments, numbers 12 through 16, as presented to Planning Commission. Is there a second?
A second.
Vice Chair Pouncil and Julie, roll call, please.
Great. Alexander.
Aye.
Lang.
Aye.
O'Meara.
Aye.
Patel.
Aye.
Council.
Aye.
Routh.
Aye.
Spivak.
Aye.
Thompson.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. So I think now the question, move on to the next item here.
Thank you so much, Commissioners Patricia Diefendorfer, for the record. So now that we have taken actions on all of the amendments, I think this is the stage where Commissioner Chair, we hand it over to you, Commissioner Chair, Chair O'Meara, we hand it over to you to guide the commission to the vote at this time. Any other deliberations and vote? Thank you.
Thank you for that amendments presentation. A lot of work went into that package as well, I know, in somewhat of a short order, and really appreciate how nimble and responsive staff has been throughout the several sessions of Planning Commission work session. And so, Vice Chair Thompson, did you have a comment or question? Go
I'm
ahead.
just wondering if we could take like a 2 or 3 minute recess, quick break. I want to make sure that everyone's, I think people might need to step out and refresh, and I don't want to preclude any deliberation.
Yeah,
Someone needs to
that
step
sounds
away.
great. Why don't we go ahead and reconvene at 2:15? Thanks, Vice Chair Thompson, for calling that.
I think so. Well, we can remind them. Yeah. They would be voting on these 5 volumes as of.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Unless they have deliberation or questions. If they have further questions, they'll say.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fine. So they don't need to individually.
No. No, change the volume.
Wait, Barry, what was that last one?
It's a question.
Okay, reconvening us here at the July 9th City of Portland Planning Commission meeting. And Commissioner Lang and Commissioner Routh have some additional comments and maybe one or two questions for staff before we proceed to the deliberations before a vote. Go ahead, Commissioner Lang.
Thank you. It's amazing what a restroom break does to the brain. Apparently, some of us had the same thoughts around Amendment 10, fencing between residential and industrial. And I think to start the conversation, can you explain exactly what is meant by fencing?
I think this, Barry Manning, planning staff for the record, it would just allow construction of fences, which are considered structures within that buffer area. If there were property lines where people wanted to maintain property, they could do so in that buffer area where there's no other types of development allowed. So just typical fences that you would see in other situations.
So this would allow for fencing, but it wouldn't require fencing?
Would not require it. It would allow for it.
And when you say fencing, can it be barbed wire? Is it brick? Is it trees? What?
I would need to look at the zoning code to see exactly what is allowed there. Eric might have that off the top of his head.
The zoning code has a couple levels of fences as you progress from like a wooden type fence up to a concrete wall. So you can specify different levels in different situations. There's also berms that is used in the zoning code sometimes.
But this does not require.
Can I just add, sorry, Patricia Diefender for the record, I think the purpose of the fence in this case is to create a buffer and screen between industrial uses and the more mixed uses that would occur on the other zone properties in the other zone. So that's the purpose. It's for screening and buffering between those uses.
And I understand that. So residential units go up, and they don't put a fence up because it's just industrial land and nothing's going on there. And then an industrial development comes in. And you say it's not mandatory, so they decide they don't want to fence up, but the residential people want to fence up, but that shouldn't be their problem. It should be put on the developer of the industrial site to build that fence to protect their property. And I think that's kind of where we were going with this a little bit when we were talking about that, is it kind of creates some issues, maybe even lawsuits down the road.
So yeah,
Take it away.
So when we were talking about buffer, a fence is a physical, visual buffer, right, between the residential and industrial. And that brought to mind, just as we were looking at it, and I forgive me for not bringing this up before, the interplay, the tension between residential and industrial, is something that we have experienced in past, in like good neighbor agreements. How does residential and industrial coexist? Thank you very much. That's a great word. And this isn't the last time we're going to have this conversation. Especially as we're looking at the need for housing production and looking at buildable lands. And so I'm curious, and I don't know if this is transmittal letter or if this is, and I'm sorry, but on the fly amendment around looking at exploring something like a public health overlay zone that has recently been, Eugene recently passed a public health overlay zone that brings into a structured conversation around what are the other aspects of buffer needed and issues acknowledged in that interplay, that coexistence between industrial and residential that includes, water, air, and soil considerations. So that is what I put forward.
I'm going to ask a question, Patricia. So the context of this buffer in this plan, I want to just make sure I'm following. There's a section of the plan area that is the interface between the primary site and the industrial land to the north, and you've created a zone along that edge where you're saying you don't want buildings or other structures, and that's designed to separate what's to the north. So in this case, we're not. It's the standard is operating on the development of the primary site, right?
The setback would apply, I believe it's in the EX zone, and it's a 20-foot essentially setback, and it's a landscape setback.
And then
So if it's on the EX zone, then it would be on the portion of the property that would conceivably have the housing.
Yeah. So the
Yes.
housing side of the line has this larger setback.
Yes.
Is what
Yes.
you're talking
Yes.
about. And
To create
the amendment
a buffer.
10 was to clarify that you can still put fences in
You
there.
could have a fence within that area.
Within the setback area.
Yeah. In addition to that, you've also got that other sub area that is between the
That's the EG zoned area.
right. So there's a zone in there where you're zoning for employment, not housing, but not heavy industrial, and that's also part of
That's
the
part of the transition,
So you've
the
got the
idea of
heavy industrial
transitioning.
north of the this Nikolai.
Which is separated
You've
by
got
the
a
street.
transition of about a block that's employment but not housing, and then you've got this additional setback. So that's the sequence right now.
So I guess to further clarify, based on what Barry was just saying, is that the fence, the provision about adding the ability to put a fence is in what is considered to be essentially a rear yard setback. And so typically, I think in a setback, you wouldn't be allowed to put a fence. And I think here we're saying that you can put a fence in that setback area to further kind of allow for that screening and buffering. Even though, as Eric pointed out, there's still the EG zoned area, which is also, in a sense, a transitional area between the mixed use area and the more heavy industrial.
So to the meta question about how we deal with industrial interface writ large, I think is what you're getting at. And in this plan, our approach was to separate housing from the heavy industrial by that strip of employment.
And just, Barry Manning for the record, and just to clarify, you actually can put structures like fences in typical situations in a setback, but in this particular setback, we adopted regulations from a different standard, a different buffering standard that said all structures are prohibited within this this landscape setback. And through the course of our discussions, it was the issue about fences, which could be beneficial in this particular situation, would be prohibited. So we're rectifying that by we're allowing them in this particular area. So just to clarify what the amendment that you voted on is really to just allow something that would be typically allowed in these kinds of situations, but this particular version of the code didn't provide for that.
Would it be possible to pull up the urban design diagram real quick as a visual aid? Thank you.
Resource slide.
While Barry is doing that, Patricia Diefenderfer for the record, Commissioner Routh, did you have, you had mentioned this overlay, and I want to make sure that have we answered your question? Or,
No.
Okay. So I think what I would say is that notion, there is no existing public health overlay in the zoning code. So the idea of introducing that here is not something I think that we can do on the fly. If there was something that you wanted to note, for example.
So what I'm hearing is that would be
yes.
in a transmittal letter.
That would be in a transmittal letter,
Great.
exactly, because
That was my
there's no
question.
such thing, it doesn't, in the code today, it doesn't exist, and we can't say just add, regulations per section, blah, blah, blah of the code. It just does not exist, yeah.
It is something the Bureau has done research on over the years because it comes up. So it's not like we're not aware of that concept, but just want to make that clear.
But it has been brought up by a number of community-based organizations in particularly in Argay Terrace, the Prologis site in East Portland. And so it's like, is this an opportunity to do that? That would make me feel a lot better about this project.
Yeah, as Patricia said, it's probably not workable to just tack that on as an amendment, but saying that it should be part of our work plan or continue to be part of our work plan and that we should do something about that is fair game from
Great.
the transmittal point of view.
Awesome, thank you.
And to be clear, we've done research on it. We have no plan at this point to bring such an overlay forward, but that's for a future discussion as well.
Vice Chair Tom, excuse me, Barry Manning for the record. Vice Chair Thompson had asked for the urban design diagram, so I brought that up for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought it would be helpful to the earlier discussion about what exactly we're buffering and where.
Yeah, and it's essentially that green line between what is the employment area between Nikolai and this zone change area and the mixed-use employment areas that would be to the south would include the former ESCO site, the American Can site, part of the Montgomery Park site, and to some extent we modified the setback arrangement in the very small lot configuration between 23rd and 24th because the conditions were different there. But so it really applies from 24th to Ward Way on the west.
Okay, I think that resolved your questions. Thank you for bringing those up, and thank you for the confirmation that that would be appropriate in the transmittal letter as opposed to an additional amendment, given that we don't have the zone created yet, which makes sense. So unless there are further clarifying questions, I think we are ready to proceed to any additional comment or deliberation. I recommend that we do move to vote today. And so my comments still stand from previous. I do just want to emphasize that if we get to a recommendation today, that then reopens the opportunity for public comment, testimony, additional deliberation before council as the package would proceed. So I also see a recommendation as being a good steward of continued public deliberation and process as it would go forward to city council. So any additional comments? Go ahead.
Commissioner Rath, for the record, thank you. I wonder, I know that this is not our normal process. I wonder if we could preview a conversation about what might be in a transmittal letter so that that could be somewhat settled law before we vote. Because I guess I'm feeling like that if there are a few provisions in the letter, I would feel more comfortable. But I would not. That might change my vote. Sorry,
No, I understand the question, and I think we've already introduced one item, right? Per your previous question around the public health overlay zone. Deferring to staff, maybe Commissioner Spivak, you have a comment on that
I think
question?
it seems fair game to say what we might want in the letter. I'm a little curious. The public benefit agreement and this plan are supposed to hit city council at the same time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And therefore the PBA is going to be a public document, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So I guess I would put in there something that this particularly public benefits agreement should be posted some amount of time before city council. Because sometimes when we've been waiting on, we've passed the zoning code and there's something accompanying it and it shows up like right before city council and no one had a chance. So that's a small item, but I'd like to see if it be posted at least 30 days before both, this obviously and the whatever's worked out for PPA.
Just to clarify, planning documents we typically do post at minimum 30 days before. And so that could apply to the public benefit agreement as well.
That's what I was getting to. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, additional items that commissioners would want prioritized for the transmittal letter? Vice Chair Pouncil?
Vice Chair Pouncil, I just basically have a clarifying question on, so I submitted a letter. Will that be go towards council, or will that just kind of stay with staff?
Vice Chair Pouncil, you're, as a member of the commission, you gave those comments to staff. And they would not be forwarded to council because you are part of the commission and you will do your deliberations here and have your vote here. If there was anything you wanted to raise from those comments that weren't addressed, you're welcome to ask the questions here.
Oh, goodness.
Let's give Vice Chair Pouncil a short break after that unfortunately time spill. I'm sorry. And we can come back to your question, Vice Chair Pouncil. Are there additional items for the transmittal letter? Vice Chair Thompson?
Yeah, I would be interested in looking for opportunities to strengthen the public benefits agreement by including some of the community-based organizations and the York group in particular in that process. And I'd be interested to understand the timeline. Is it September that this is intended to go to City Council? And I don't know if there's any nascent plans on the part of the Bureau or consideration to trying to convene a meeting or a series of meetings with one or more of the CBOs and the private, the property owners to see if there may be some opportunities to find common ground.
Commissioner or Vice Chair Thompson, I can tell you that we already have a meeting scheduled with the York group. And that's the request that we have. And, I think that if you wanted to include this in the transmittal letter, that would be the commission's prerogative. And we're going to continue to develop the public benefit agreement and talk with the York group as needed and take direction ultimately from the City Council.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would, Vice Chair Pouncil again here. Sorry about that mishap. I would like to be able to see like some type of outreach to tribal community, on this, and I can't help but to say too, that it's important that the document that was created for the MP2H that was written specifically for this plan is referenced and is used in making decisions on the benefits agreement for this plan.
Commissioner Alexander and then Commissioner Rath.
Okay, I would support the comments of my fellow commissioners. And I think we've brought a tremendous amount of sort of focus and intentionality on constructive engagement with the York group. Their proposal for the urban village concept is broader than what we're just doing here. And I would hope that commission would indicate our desire or our intentionality about finding the intersections in our scope of work and their desires, but also model that to other divisions of the city. I mean, we're looking at housing, we're looking at job development, but there are so many other places where bureaus can begin to import elements of that. And I hope that we can model the willingness of the city to sort of hear that and to partner where it's appropriate, but to encourage others to do the same.
Commissioner Rath.
feel like I just want to give an extra moment of breath for that one. That was great. Also, I think it would be good to highlight that this is a scoped project. That was this was originally larger, and the staff have listened to the importance of retaining some of that industrial land. So just appreciating the many conversations that have led us to this scope of project. Thank you.
Okay, any additional comments for the transmittal letter? And we will be able to review a draft of that and add comments per usual process. So
I do have one.
go
more.
ahead. Yes, Vice Chair Council.
And in in the racial equity analysis, that there be particular attention paid to policy 5.17 and policy 6.13, which would mainly be talking about, land and land kind of, for, or land banking, that those things go into consideration.
Okay, thank you, Commission, for those comments, and for Commissioner Routh, your recommendation that we go through some of those priority items before we proceed to the vote. So I do think it's time to do that. If commissioners agree, let's proceed to the vote. And I would appreciate if we could have the actual language for the motion that needs to be made, if we have that in a slide. Otherwise, I can wing it and you can jump in.
Do you want to bring up that last slide? I mean, essentially, commissioners, as you know, you're voting on the plan in its entirety, multiple volumes 1 through 5, which include appendices. And you're voting on them as amended, with the inclusion of the amendments that you all just approved. So that's basically the action that is before you. And what you're doing is you are voting to recommend that the Planning Commission recommend that council adopt the plan and all of its components.
It looks like, Barry, you're trying to jump in.
Yeah, I would just, I'm bringing up the slide that we have here, but I think as Patricia noted, you know that you're voting on all 5 volumes as amended. And I think that maybe it's just the first line of this that you need to take action on. Maybe that's just the motion. Recommend to City Council adoption of the Montgomery Park Area Plan as amended, including volumes 1 through 5.
Okay, thank you. I make a motion that the Planning Commission recommend to City Council adoption of the Montgomery Park Area Plan as amended with volumes 1 through 5. Is there a second?
I second.
Commissioner Lang? Any further discussion or deliberation before we proceed to roll call? Okay, Julie, please call the roll.
Great. Alexander?
Aye.
Lang?
First, I want to thank the staff, and I apologize for missing our last work session. Obviously, a lot of conversation went on there as I read through the information afterwards that I would have been, it would have helped me to be part of that conversation. But thank you for putting that together, and I love the commentary that went on today. It was very helpful to me, and obviously I've been working on this from a more narrow vision of what streetcar can bring to that area, and really appreciate the fuller conversations that went on here, and excited about the future of the plan and seeing it move forward. So I vote aye.
Thanks. O'Meara?
Aye.
Patel?
Aye.
Council?
No.
Routh?
When I was coming into this meeting, this work session, one of the things that that I was really pulling into was, who is this for? And I feel heartened by the attention to community-based organizations. I really appreciate the conversation here, and because it is very true that trust is difficult to gain with communities, in particular communities of color. It is very quick to lose and very difficult to come back from that. And so I appreciate the conversation around with my fellow commissioners here on that because it is, trust is the only coin of the realm. It goes through all planning and policy conversations. And that had been one thing that was weighing on me, as it has in a lot of plans that we have had. And I know that I'm very far from alone in that. The other piece that has weighed on me is, the how this project relates to other parts of the city, in particular the neighborhoods that I've grown up in. I appreciate and will use the transmittal letter around the public health overlay. So as I think that is a really important jumping off point, and I think that that's important for us all to hold throughout the city, particularly in low-income communities and communities of color, as we're really moving into a place where there are mounting trade-offs that long-hanging fruit has long since been plucked with a lot of our planning processes. So I will vote aye.
Thank you. Spivak.
I'll say a word too quick. We've shared a lot of concerns about this project. Some things I like about it. This is housing for a lot of people. We need housing. It'll include a lot of affordable housing. It's a high opportunity. It's a great location where people can live a great life without driving. They can walk to Forest Park. They can walk downtown, and transit's part of that. And I think that it's a great opportunity for the York Village. So that's the pieces have to come together. But the fear would be that it takes a long time or it doesn't happen. But I'm optimistic that this plan helps allow it to happen. So aye.
Thank you. And Thompson.
No.
Okay, I believe that the plan has been approved to proceed to City Council. So thank you, everyone, for the deliberations today, and a reminder that we don't always have to agree. That's the point of public process, and it's been a healthy one. So I really appreciate all of commission deliberation, and of course, again, a huge appreciation to staff and everyone who has participated. I look forward to seeing future public engagement on this plan. Congratulations. And with that, I think we will adjourn. Thank you all. Stay cool.